on the, I do it, and it was last week.
Okay. All right.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, Rabbi.
Hey, Heather. How are you? Hi, Phyllis. Hi, Phil. Hi, Beth. Welcome.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, hello.
All right. So here we go. Let me begin the sharing here. There we go. So today we are on our 5th class of our Jewish history crash course. And so what we're going to see today is, as I said last time, going to see the Dreyfus affair and the protocols of Zion and the beginnings of Zionism. That's what we're going to do. And then after Passover, we're going to go into a break. After Passover, we'll talk more about Zionism and so on. All right, so the Dreyfus affair, very, very important piece in the Jewish history. Very incredibly important. I cannot even begin to describe to you how important this was. So the Dreyfus affair was so important that there are more than 1,000 books about it and its consequences for France. When we last left our heroes were in the Enlightenment, right? And what was happening during the Enlightenment is that we saw those tensions in terms of anti-Semitism during an enlightened France. Right now, Dreyfus is going to be a test case for that. In part, we're going to see, because in part, he's a completely assimilated Jew, right? So there was even an opera in New York in 1992, and many affirm that this was a catalyst for Zionism as a political movement. If that is true, I'm not so sure. So what was the Dreyfus Affair? Was a major political and social controversy in France between 1894 and 1906. So notice how long it lasts, right? It starts when Alfred Dreyfus is falsely accused of spying for Germany. And you can tell, and I showed this last class, right? This is one of my favorite ways of introducing what was the Dreyfus affair, right? This is Karen Dash. He writes he draws this in 1898, and this is a regular family. And once they talked about the Dreyfus affair, right? You can see it's quite violent even, right? You have someone stabbing someone else here with a fork. The poor dog got a fork in its behind, right? Everyone is clearly going, right? Someone is breaking a glass on someone else's head and so on, right? It was really violent, and we're going to see it is violent. So what was the case? The case was a slip of paper that was discovered in a German military trash can. Right, so you and I know, like, people spy on each other. France and Germany are not the best of the friends in the late 1800s, right? So in October, this lady who was actually a French spy, and her job was just to get the trash of the French embassy, of the German embassy to the French, right? So what do they find there is this promise that they would be given this artillery manual to the Germans, right? So 5 officers are accused by this Armand Dupaty de Clam, right? What he forces all of them to write something so he can do a handwriting analysis, right? Major de Clam, he's a major back then. You can look at his nice face here. You can decide if he's your friend or not. But whether you like it or not, he's an amateur in handwriting analysis. He does not think that France is going the right way. We talked about this, right? To us, equality, brotherhood, and liberty are incredible, great values. not everyone thinks like that. So Becklem is one of those who does not think France is going the right way. He wanted a Catholic monarchy for France. That tells you already. He does not like the Jews at all, in the army or anywhere in the country by that matter. He swears that the culprit for selling those national secrets can only be the only Jew among the 5 suspects. That person is an officer of the artillery, Alfred Dreyfus. And here he is. Look at his phoneme. Nice Jewish boy, trying really to be nice. Has a nice little French mustache, very proper. And poor guy doesn't know what's going to happen. Didn't have a bar mitzvah. Has no idea what being Jewish is about. Comes from a rich family. So he has absolutely no motive to be selling secrets. To swears he's innocent, absolutely swears he's innocent, does not even have the clearance to read the manual. So chances are he didn't have the access to the manual. He also, there is this expert in graphology from the Bank of France who says that this cannot be a match. This guy cannot have possibly written this letter, right? He brings to his trial 12 witnesses that swear about his good character and his devotion to France. You'd say, well, probably he's innocent. Well, he's innocent, but there's Major Hubert Joseph Henry. This guy is another one who shares the claim's positions in all things. He affirms that he has a respectable person that named Dreyfus as culpable. He swore on a crucifix that he had other documents that proved Dreyfus's guilt, but he could not produce them because they are top secret. I'm going to stop here for a second just to say, right, in the optics of this Jew being accused by a guy kissing a crucifix is something. I don't know, right? It would not fly here in America in the 21st century, but back then, it was a thing. It was okay. He brought in a guy called Alphonse Bertillon, another amateur, who affirmed that this was a case of auto forgery. Handwriting could not match because Dreyfus was faking his handwriting twice. That was how he decided that, well, for all his work, he's promoted to lieutenant colonel after this whole thing. The newspapers go completely insane with the affair, and that's an important piece for us to understand. The newspapers focus on the fact that Dreyfus was a rich Jew and he was born in an area called Alsace. Now, Alsace area is at the border of France and Germany, and as the two countries are fighting, right, Alsace becomes German, Alsace goes back to being French, and so on and so forth. He is born there. The family eventually moves to Paris to be done with this going back and forth between France and Germany. And you would say, well, maybe they chose France, but not the newspapers. The newspapers continue to say, what is he actually? Is he French? Is he German? Oh, maybe he's part of the international Jewish conspiracy. So here is an example. You have a newspaper that says Dreyfus is a traitor. Vive la France, right? Long live France. Long live the Republic. Long live the army. Down with traitors, but notice that exactly the same newspaper also puts out a number saying that he's innocent. And these are the defenses of the right, the justice, and the and the truth in French. And again, long live France, long live the Republic, long live the army, long live down with the traitors. Right? So this is an important piece for us to understand, that this thing goes completely insane, in part because the newspapers are going to create this. Right now, the trial was secret. The trial was closed to the public. And that's an important piece for us to know, right? Dreyfus is sentenced to life in prison on a remote prison island called Devil's Island. He stays there without much human contact for 4 years, not knowing that his brother and his family are working tirelessly to prove his innocence. Dreyfus was not sentenced to death just because it was abolished for political crimes just before in 1848, right? Newspapers on the right and on the left think that this is a pity. The guy should hang, right? And so what happens to Dreyfus? This is the degradation of Dreyfus. It's a very famous image of that time, right? Here you have him without his epaulets, right? Those epaulets, what you see here is actually a picture of the original epaulets he had. This is in the Jewish Museum in Paris. And what happened is, right, this is one of the newspapers describing that to you. While the drums rolled, Dreyfus was accompanied by 4 artillery officers who brought him before an officer of the state who read the judgment. A Republican guard adjutant tore off his badges, thin stripes of cloth, his stripes, cuffs, and sleeves in the jacket cuts it off. As he's paraded then throughout the streets, what do the crowds chant? Death to the Judas, death to the Jew. Witnesses report then the dignity of Dreyfus, who continued to maintain his innocence while raising his arms and saying, "Innocent, innocent, long live the French, long live the army." Where does he end his, right? Where is he? He's in the French Guiana. If you know where the French Guiana is, that is in the very north of South America. Now that's the French Guiana. This is the isle, right? It's called the Devil's Island. And this is the house where he stayed. Dreyfus is one of the very few that actually come back, because up to him, no one had come back because they all died from diseases, from fevers, right? Dreyfus actually almost dies a couple of times, and he writes a lot. And you have there a picture of him writing in Devil's Island. One of the interesting things is that he used to be chained to his bed, but after a few years, the guards kind of let him. Where is he going to go, right? So now what happens for ours, that there's a plot for our purposes. There's a plot twist. French intelligence discovers a second piece in the same German office, promising new deliveries of French military secrets. The handwriting is identical, found in the piece of paper used in Dreyfus' case. Because Dreyfus was in Devil's Island, it could not be him, right? And you'd imagine that here in America today, again, 21st century, like, he would have a recourse, but he doesn't, even though he is, right, clearly not guilty. The handwriting experts traced the writing to Ferdinand Esterhazy, notorious gambler, and here is his face. If you like his mustache, right? That there is and then of course begins a big cover up, because our friend Colonel Henry begins this cover up, and the cover up then is leaked to the press. Esterhazy was also brought to a court martial, but he was a bona fide Frenchman. Despite the serious evidence against him, the army voted to protect him as one of his own, and he is acquitted. Major Georges Picard was not amused, because he wanted the traitor to be brought to justice and stop the leaks. And here you have Picard. Well, how do the army tell Picard that that's a good thing? They send him away. But Esterhazy leaves France, shaves his mustache, and lives the rest of his days in England, a free man after all. He writes and publishes anti-Semitic stuff to the very end. Poor Georges Picard is sent to Tunisia because he simply cannot go off the case, and that is how the army repays him back for the fact that he actually wants the culpable guy behind bars. So now what that does is an unrest among the liberals. The Dreyfus affair brings out the anti-Semitism of the French society into the open. And now we are in 1898, right? What is going to begin here? A group of liberal senators charges the army with undermining the very foundations of the republic, which is equality before the law. And they will demand a retrial for Dreyfus. Right? Émile Zola, very famous French writer, he publishes a letter to the president of France called J'accuse, right? And that letter really turns the tide a little bit in favor of Dreyfus. Right? Zola argues that the government and the army had conspired to convict Dreyfus on false grounds. He accuses the government and the army of committing treason against humanity by playing to the public's anti-Semitism in an attempt to divert popular attention from their own public failures. So hold on to that. When we talk a little later on about anti-Semitism, this is something you're going to be seeing, that anti-Semitism is used to divert the people's attention of problems, right? Those things are not going to be easily found. So this is part of the letter, and then you're going to understand why the government is so angry with Zola, right? This affair is a nightmare for all those who know its true details. Commander Dupaty de Clem arrests Dreyfus in secret. He turns to Mrs. Dreyfus, terrorizes her, says to her that if she speaks, her husband is lost. Behind this, there are only the romantic and lunatic imaginations of Commander de Clem. Dreyfus is a victim of the lurid imagination of Major Dupaty de Clem, the religious circles surrounding him, and the dirty Jew obsession that is the scourge of our time. Yeah, the president is not amused at all. What happens is we're still in 1898. What happens? Zola is placed on trial and convicted for libel. He's sent to prison for a year and has to pay 3,000 francs. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Joseph Henry is one of the witnesses on Zola's trial because he's really trying to cover, right? What we're going to see is a forgery, because that's exactly what happens. The military eventually caves in and calls Henry and demands to see those famous secret documents that are his evidence. And of course, it's a forgery. And it's obviously that it's a forgery. And I'm sure you did not see that coming, right? So Henri is thrown in jail. He kills himself in jail. That's the end of Henri. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, anti-Semitic riots are definitely happening all around France, right? The France that promised equality to the Jews if they just got on with the pleasure of being French people, right? And this takes 3 waves of 55 different cities, 69 riots in France alone, a week-long demonstration in 5 different places in Algeria, right? Demonstrators threw stones, chanted slogans. They attack Jewish property, sometimes attack Jewish people. They resist the police that are trying to stop them, right? Most historians suggest that all these riots are spontaneous reactions to the publication of J'accuse, to the trial of Zola, and to the second trial of Dreyfus. Okay, so in 1899, Dreyfus is brought back from the Devil's Islands for a retrial. The second trial proceeded. The army officials and the royalist Catholic press released incredibly anti-Semitic statements, including a warning that the Jews could all face mass extermination. And here is a drawing that someone does of Dreyfus during his trial. And you can see he aged quite a bit in those years in the Devil's Island. And this is his defense team. Now, despite these scare tactics, Dreyfus had the evidence, including the papers, the handwriting, Henry's forgery, and all was working for him during this retrial, right? What happens? What do you think? What do you think happened the second time? Let's see. Phil, what do you think happened?
Find him guilty again.
Exactly. They find him guilty again. Oops, wait a second. Right? They find him guilty again. So let's stop here for a second. And I want you to see, because this is going to be a difficult but important lesson, right? We are going to see all sorts of caricatures that are appearing in newspapers, are being sent as postcards to people against Dreyfus, right? So you see here the on the top there, it's saying equality, right? And this guy here that is as a statue that is right, is holding Dreyfus, protecting Dreyfus, is his commander. I want you to notice that you already have an anti-Semitic trope, right, which is money and the Jews, right? On Dreyfus' head is written traitor, just in case you don't know, right? And on the bottom there, it is saying, for us, when we are so only a simple detention, the bullets are for the smaller birds, right? So I want you to see this is what is being sent all around. This is a publication, right? The Museum of Horrors, or the Horror Museum, is basically people who are completely anti-Dreyfus, right? And they are going to, if you want to see, right, when I put this up for you guys to get, you can go into Flickr. They have all the pictures there, but you can see here Dreyfus as a hydra, right? You cut one of the heads and it appears, right? It was finally published, prohibited by the government in 1900s, but during its years, it is really, really anti-Semitic, and in general, we would call it political propaganda, right? So here, for instance, and you can see that Jews are a major preoccupation of these people, right? This is the Baron of Rothschild. This is Émile Zola himself, drawn here as a pig, right? And spreading Caca Internacional, right, on the map of France, because he dared to defend Dreyfus, right? He's called the King of Pigs. And of course, the idea that Jews are octopi is also there, right? You have another here, but the Baron James Rothschild as a dog hiding money, right? I want you to notice that today in America, we would never imagine, but oops, look at the name of this newspaper, right? It's called the Anti-Jewish Press. This is 1866, right? Imagine having a newspaper called that, the Anti-Jew, right? And living in France, I want you to realize that when we talk even nowadays about the anti-Semitism in France, there is a very, very big tradition, right? A voice in France against Jews, right? So this is 1896. They're calling people to come and rise against the Jews, rise against the traitors, right? And clearly is right, a call to arms, right? This is a different newspaper. This is a different newspaper called just the Anti-Jew, right? Jews in the War Ministry. This is a typical one that I just found, like, in 2 seconds. It's a typical one, right? This is 4th of September, 1898. What can you learn in its pages of that same number, right? You see here, down with the Jews, Israel among us. You can also learn songs that are anti-Jewish songs, right? Because that's how they roll, right? This is called the free speech, right? Stays in existence until 1924, right? The caption of this one down here is their country. And you can tell, right? You have money falling here, right? This is all, right? This Edouard Dumont, we're going to see, is really, really anti-Semitic. He's also anti-capitalist, right? So for those who are worried about, right, anti-Semitism from one side or another side, this you can tell where it's coming from, right? It's definitely from the left. That doesn't matter. We're going to see that this is definitely not right a left or right issue in France. There, they can right in during the Dreyfus affair, both left and left and right agree this. Free speech after Henry's suicide, it sponsors a public donation list in favor of the widow, right, in which the donors could express a wish. And then you have things in 1898. That is the important piece for you to understand, right? A cook likes to put the Jews in her ovens, right? A vicar who ardently wishes to exterminate all Jews and Freemasons. A little vicar in Poitou, it's the city, could be happy to sing with joy a requiem for the last Jew left. I want you to notice that anti-Semitism is very strong. You might be surprised, but 14,000 people donate to this widow, right? So notice that they have readership, right? This Edouard Drummond that has that newspaper, he writes this a book. It's a 2-year, it's a 2-volume book, 1,200 pages. It sells 100 whole printings in the first 2 years. I want you to notice, right? What is the name of the book? The Jewish Friends, the France Reeve, right? Look here, what in the picture, what you have. You have the Jew down here. And how do we know it's a Jew? You have the money bag on the one side. You have the tablets of the law, right? The figure has a beard, and it's all kind of sickly and white. And notice that the Christian guy is coming to kill him, right? And that's an important piece. That's part of Drummond's idea, right? This is another thing that you have here, which is the real debacle. Dreyfus is shown here as with a hat of a German helmet, right? With a much bigger nose, right? This is saying disgrace down here, right? His brother and Zola are right here, and the person who was showing the new papers for Picard is here with this rabbit, right? And so what I want you to notice is that the anti-Dreyfus group is very strong and pretty big as well. So notice postcards. I call them the memes of the time. If you know what a meme is that are going to social media, postcards serve the same thing, right? So here you have Dreyfus talking to Judas, right? And saying, how am I going to get out of this? It's because of the right to a second trial, right? And just like Judas was able to get out of it, right? This is stating that Dreyfus was guilty of selling France for 30 coins. Right here you have Émile Zola in another postcard that says the works of Zola, the money, and he's bowing down to a Jew, right? You can see there with walking, right? So those postcards are being sent all over the place, right? 2 postcards here are accusing Levi, right? Levi, uh, of municipal election fraud. So I want you to see how anti-Semitism is being used for all sorts of desires, right? Of opportunistic stuff, right? I'm against elections. I think the elections were stolen from me, so I'm going to accuse the Jews, right? And here you have two of those postcards, right? This one is a Viennese magazine, well known for its anti-Semitism, Kikeriki, right? And it says in the Dreyfus affair, the more is exposed, the more Judah is embarrassed, right? Still trying to say that Dreyfus is guilty. So other magazines were trying to say, but we are the only reason that the Dreyfus is being convicted is because he's Jewish, right? This drawing says a no stakes over, meaning right because he's Jewish, he's being accused, right? And so you have not guilty and cut off, right? Because Dreyfus was cut off from the public. Right? This is another one trying to be in favor of Dreyfus, but notice it's using the same imagery, right? It's accusing the military of being this octopi, right? That has dishonor, forgery, assassination, corruption, falsehood, and Dreyfus is here in one of its hands. Picard is another one. Zola is here as well, and justice and honor are being killed, right? Because of the pair of friends. So I want you to notice, even those in favor are using anti-Semitic imagery, and I think that that's an important piece for us to be aware, right? So how does the whole thing end? I'm glad you asked. Right? This you have the poor Dreyfus here in his second trial, and I think you can tell that the man has aged a little bit, right? I'm always surprised whenever I see his pictures from after 4 years in Devil's Island. So, despite the weight of the facts, military court, as Phil said, pronounced him guilty. Still, right? After less than an hour of deliberations. The court, though, was willing to reduce his sentence from life to 10 years due to extenuating circumstances, as long as he went through a second degradation, believe it or not. Because degrading the Jew once is not enough. Let's do this again, right? The liberal reaction to this verdict, both in France and the rest of Western Europe, was one of shock and some violence. The new president of France, Émile Loubet, hastened to silence the uproar by pardoning Dreyfus quickly, as long as Dreyfus admitted he was guilty. And Dreyfus, after 4 years in Devil's Island, actually admits that he's guilty. He just wants to go home, right? But he eventually gets to be completely exonerated 7 years later. That's when he's exonerated, and you can see him here in the ceremony of rehabilitation that he goes through. So that is the Dreyfus affair. Dreyfus is a good, incredibly good Frenchman, because he's reinstated to the artillery major, right? He gets a new rank because this reflects the rank that he could reasonably have been expected to have risen to his career, right? After serving a year as a commander, however, he has to retire because he has all those fevers that continue to plague him, that he picked up in the French Guiana, right? In Devil's Island. He has chronic fatigue because of the imprisonment. But you know what happens? In the First World War, he returns from his retirement and fights for France, believe it or not. Telling you he was a real good French guy, right? And here you have the last pictures of him in 1934, right? This is him and his wife, Lucie. He dies a year later. He dies in 1935. Lucie is then hidden in a convent so that she won't be taken. And when we get to more modern Jewish history, when we get to World War II, we'll talk briefly about that, right? So she hides in a convent. One of their granddaughters is killed in Auschwitz, and Lucie dies in 1945. And one thing we know about Dreyfus, as in his last years of being a free man, is that he loves the new thing that was just invented in the 30s, which are sneakers. He really loves them. And you can see him here in a pair of white sneakers while he's embracing his grandkids, right? I hope you see that. He looks happy, the kids are happy, and at least at that moment, everyone is happy in that family. So meanwhile, back in Eastern Europe, right? What is happening? Right back, we left our friends in the shtetl, left our friends in Poland. We took a detour a little bit in France, and we're coming back. What is happening there? Well, there is the beginning and the end of Tsarist Russia, right? What is the beginning of Tsarist Russia? Ivan the Terrible is the first Tsar of all Russia. That marks the start of the Tsarist era. The end of this is going to be 1917 with the Russian Revolution, when Tsar Nicholas II, we're going to see a little bit about him, abdicates in March, and the Romanov dynasty ends after 300 years. The February Revolution ends that. The October Revolution brings the Bolsheviks to power. That's the beginning and end. I want us to have that in our heads because of what we're going to be seeing, right? With Russia. So this is Catherine the Great, the one you're seeing here, right? What happens during her reign is that she aligns. Why is she called Catherine the Great? Because she expands Russian territory. She expands the Russian Empire, right? She aligns herself with Austria and Prussia, and they take over Poland and redivide Poland. So remember, when we talked about how Poland was good for the Jews and so on, and how we had that Commonwealth of Poland and Lithuania, right? This is the area that the Russian Empire takes over. Now, the Russians don't like Jews very much, right? So Catherine the Great in 1791 is going to create an area called the Pale of Settlement, which is where all the Jews have to leave, right? So they cannot get out of there. We're going to see there are a few exceptions, right? But the Russian Empire really wants to prevent what they call the Jewish influence in Russia. Remember, when we talked about anti-Semitism, we mentioned that the church breaks between Orthodox Russian or Orthodox Greek and Catholic, right? The anti-Semitism, though, of the first church fathers is going to remain happening, right? It doesn't diminish in that sense, right? So here this is the best map I could find. I wanted you to see that in 1689, this brown area here is Russia, right? In 1725, this is, right, the yellow pieces are all new, right? They are added to the empire, meaning Russia conquers and takes them over. And finally, the green area here, right, very close to Berlin, very close to Vienna, you can see, right, if you know your European geography a little bit, right, this is all conquered by Catherine the Great. So That being said, right now, look what to the exceptions. There were some exceptions for the Jews to get out of the pay of settlement, right? So if you were a wealthy merchant, you could live elsewhere, but you had to have those uh, um, permits uh, always remade, right? It's not something that you get for life, right? You have to continue to do that, right? So the if you're a rich merchant, meaning you are from the merchant of the first guild, you could register to go out of the pale for business purposes, right? If you had a higher education, if you had a university degree, you could uh, get a permission for residence outside of the pale. If you're a professional that was deemed useful to the crown, nurses, midwives, and so on, you might get this permit as well. If you had spent 25 years serving in the army, then you eventually be granted the right to live elsewhere, anywhere else in Russia. I want you to notice that if you spend 25 years in the army, you probably are not, right? You're not observantly Jewish at all after those 25 years in the Russian army. I'm not saying that that happens in every army, God forbid, but in the Russian army, that was definitely a thing. Now, even with those exceptions, important for us to notice that the vast majority of the Russians, the Jews in the Russian Empire, had to stay in the pay of the settlement. And also the exceptions, if you messed up anyhow, they could be revoked, right? So there is no sense. Now, this is going to be something important for us to know and to be very aware, especially because of what's happening nowadays between Russia and Ukraine, right? The pale of settlement. I want you to remember that this is because Poland and Lithuania are taken over by Russia. They have what we call Belarus here. You have Ukraine, you have a little piece called Moldova, you have a piece of Poland here, and you have Lithuania, and that is the payoff settlement, right? So when we talked last time about the Baal Shem Tov and whatnot, right? And this is happening in this area here, Ukraine, Belarus, right? Lithuania, this is the area, right? When you see the fiddler on the roof, you are seeing pieces of the payoff the settlement, right? Even though very, right, Hollywood-wise, eyes, but that is important for us to see where exactly is the payoff of settlement. So now, pogroms, they happen quite often. Important for us to keep that in mind, that even though you have the payoff settlement, that doesn't mean that non-Jews do not live there, right? It means that Jews can only live in that area. And peasants are living there. So I want you to see this map because this map is going to be important for this idea of the pogroms, which are these waves of anti-Semitic incidents, right? This map is quite good because it marks by color and by form, right? The mark when each of those waves are happening, right? And I want you to notice, right? You have a concentration here in 1881, 1882, because that is when the word pogrom gets to begin to be used, right? But before that, you had smaller waves, right? You have 1821, 1859, 1871, 1880. But there's a huge wave in 1881 and 1882, and that is more than 200 events happen in the play of the settlement, right? Now, pogroms, I'm sad to say, are a reality up to the 20th century, right? Some people described October 7th as a pogrom, right? Now, the latest pogrom, the latest violence against Jews that happened, and everyone agrees it's a pogrom, was in 1946. That is in Poland. It's after World War II. two people who had come back from the camps, right? They had come back from the camps in two places, in Krakow and in Kielce, right? And the mob in Kielce just attacked the Jewish Holocaust survivors because there are false rumors, again, of what? Of a blood libel, right? Because two kids disappear. And the Jews, of course, they get the finger pointed to them, right? And those in 1946, this is the last event that everyone agrees it's a pogrom. And so those things are important for us to understand. Pogroms are not just kind of something after the 19th century. It goes well after a mid 20th century, right? So here are a few things to just show to you that those pogroms, eventually they are photographed as well, right? So here you have a French publication talking about this wave of anti-Semitic violence, right? This newspaper called La République Illustrée, the Illustrated Republic, right? And it's showing here an attack that had happened in Russia, in Novgorod. There's a photograph of Bialystok in 1904. Here you have 1905, the members of the bunch. We'll talk about the different ideological groups among Jews in Ashkenaz in our next when we talk about Zionism. We'll talk briefly about this other. This is a group of the labor bunch. You have here another one in 1919. You have another one in different areas in 1919, and this is one in Ukraine, where they, of course, destroy a synagogue. And this is pieces of Torahs and things that the Jews are trying to get back. Why is all this happening, right? The idea, right, is that this is the very end of the Tsarist Russia. Who is there? It's Tsar Nicholas II. Here's the guy, right? He rules with absolute power. People are, though, dissatisfied with this, right? The waves of enlightenment eventually are getting to Russia, right? There is no constitution, no parliament, right? The calls for reforms are increasing in all areas, right? Liberals, socialists, peasants, right? There is a rise of revolutionary movements, Bolsheviks, Mensheviks, right? Strikes, protests, political assassinations are becoming ever more common. Ruling class fear lose control, and anti-Semitism is an easy solution for that, right? What you have is that the protocols of the elders of Zion are being published. They begin in a newspaper, and then they are collected in a book in 1904. And here they are. This is the first printing of it, right? So what are they, right? They are published in 1903, right? In a newspaper called The Banner. And it has sources, though, dating from the 1860s in Russia as well, right? Most scholars agree that it was concocted by people within the Russian secret police of the time, called the Frana, likely in Paris, to incite anti-Semitism and distract from this internal unrest in Tsarist Russia. This is basically what the protocol says, right? The Jews are trying to control the world, manipulating governments, economies, and societies. You probably heard this before. Nowadays, more and more people, right, especially in the internet, are saying those things, right? Jews control the media, Jews control the education, right? And that is to shape public opinion and promote chaos and moral decay. Jews control the banks, interest rates, monopolies. Jews undermine Christian religion and morality, right? They want to destroy Christianity. Jews are using and creating this revolution. It says Jews like revolutions to destabilize governments because Jews want to seize power. So you can see how useful this is to a Tsar that is embattled, right? The Jews promote conflict and division because they stir up racial, religious, and political divisions. And finally, the Jews want to do this Jewish global government, right? You can, all those are things that if you see repeated, and they are repeated many times these days, right? You know where they come from, right? The protocols doesn't create anything. They right gain. They just pick up things that were already around. So what is happening, right? And I want us to notice that why is this being sorry guys, why is this being used, right? Because you have economic crisis, class tension, right? There is a huge inequality. Even nowadays, if you go to Russia, there is still a pretty big inequality, right? Cities are like St. Petersburg and Moscow are going fast, and the labor is poor, and the wages are small, right? In the rural areas, you have serfdom still, right? Food shortages are widespread, poverty, right? Anti-Semitism is being used as a political tool. Very important for us to be aware of this, right? Jews end up being as scapegoats, right? Jews, because they're confined to the pale of settlement, it's easy to say they are behind all this because, right, if you have the other, it's easy to otherize people, right? The pogroms are actually being encouraged or at least tolerated. Something that we're going to see is that the police doesn't care, right? Uh, and finally, this redirects the public anger from the Tsar and the government because it's easy to blame the Jews for the problems in the empire, right? I want you to be very aware of the protocols, in part because they continue to be alive today. They are exposed as forgeries by journalists, courts, historians. Doesn't matter, right? They gain a very significant leadership in the early 20th century, fueled by the Russian Revolution. It's translated in enormous amount of languages, right? You have here in Chinese, you have in Spanish, you have in Portuguese, I can tell you that, right? You have in Arabic, right? And of course you have in English and you have in Russian, right? It is propaganda. Now, one of the things is Henry Ford of the Ford cars. He really loves the protocols. He's a huge anti-Semite. He publishes the protocols in his newspaper called the Dearborn Independent, right? Nazi Germany, of course, uses it. And today you have right, the protocols alive and well in many areas of the Arab and Muslim world. Important for us to know all that, right? It is being used in part to point the finger to the state of Israel because those ideas, right, is there to control the world, so on and so forth, are transform this into something easier to hate, right? I think that that's an important piece. Going back now to 1903, the Kishinev pogrom is something that is a huge thing that we need to right, even though this is a crash course, important to talk about the Kishinev pogrom. April 1903, 5 days, right? What happens is the pogrom begins in Easter, right? And just after the protocols appear, there are people who link the two things. It begins, 49 Jews are killed, 92 are gravely injured, 500 lightly injured, and 1,500 homes are destroyed. the thing is so serious that Jews in America begin organizing a financial immigration, right? The protocols, of course, help justify such a violence. Tsarist Russia is this power keg ready for the protocols and ready for those pogroms. And here you have the pictures of the Kishinev pogroms. Those are the survivors, right? They are here in a hospital, right? And these are deceased. Nachman Bialik, if you don't know who he is, you should. He's a poet. He writes in Hebrew, and he writes this poem called The Destroyed City, the City of Slaughter. You can find it online, translated to English and to all sorts of languages, right? According to Max Diamond, Bialik's poem caused thousands of Jews to not to be a pacifist anymore and to join the fight against the Tsar, right? You have music composed because of the Kishinev pogrom. And this is the Yiddish Daily News in the New York Times. This is what they write. The mob was led by priests with the general cry, "Kill the Jews," right? And this takes over all the city. They number 120 dead, 500 injured, right? It's really terrible, but they say here the local police made no attempt to check the reign of terror. As sunset, the streets have corpses with the wounded people. Those who could make the escape fled in terror, and the city now is practically deserted of Jews. Right? This incident helps to focus internal pressure on Russia. And so here you have a very, very famous caricature of President Roosevelt talking to the Tsar, right? You can see the Jew there. The person who drew that drew a Jewish woman with a child, right? The Kishinev pogrom is in the back here. This is from 1905, right? And what is right now is called judge on top, meaning, right, Roosevelt is judging the Tsar, right? Now that you have peace without, why not have peace within you? Take the burden of oppression from the Jew and have peace within your borders, right? So I want you to notice that, right? Russia is not completely impermeable back then to public opinion and the opinion, right? And this is a picture, right, made in 1903 by Vakav Vardarki, which is called Passover Evening, the day after the Kishinev massacre, right? And this is after the pogrom, another one I really find incredible, the facial expressions in this one. And you can see the Jews leaving the area there, right? A great part of our ancestors come to America because of those pogroms, and we'll talk about that later, right? I want you to, because we're talking about things that eventually are relevant for nowadays, I want you to see what today's Russia looks like, which is the red, and what Russia before the First World War used to look like. And when you think about what exactly is this war in Ukraine, in part it's because if you read, if you listen to or read translations of the one of the first speeches of Putin just before the Ukraine-Russia war began, he wants to return Russia to its grandeur, meaning he wants to go back to Catherine the Great's empire. And that is an important piece for everyone to, I don't know, keep in mind, I think. But that's just me. And so here we are winding down because of those pressures of the Dreyfus affair, because of the anti-Semitism in Russia. You have movements already of Jews trying to go back to the land. And we'll talk more about that after Passover, right? What you see down here, and we'll talk about more about them, is two movements, the Hovevei Tzion movement and the Biluv movement, already in Russia in 1880s, trying to talk to the Jews about getting out of Russia, not to the United States, but to the land of Israel. But a big person in this whole story is our friend here with the big beard. This is Theodor Herzl, right? He is a completely assimilated Jew in Vienna. He's not in Vienna, he's from Budapest, but he's working at a newspaper in Vienna, right? And because he witnesses the Dreyfus affair, people believe that he's witnessing that makes him understand that this idea of Jewish emancipation and Jewish acceptance in Europe is never going to work, right? We'll talk more deeply about him next time. He decides to begin this back then thought of a fever dream of getting Jews out of Europe and to another place. And we'll see that this is going to, right, to eventually those forces kind of get together and create what we call today political Zionism. But Herzl simply wants to end anti-Semitism somehow. And we'll see that a little bit more deeply next time. But the seeds of what we call today political Zionism are in those pogroms and in the Dreyfus affair. All right, folks, this is the class for today. This is where I leave you, and I hope that you have a good Pesach, a kosher Pesach, a happy one, right? Celebrate freedom and have as much matzah as your stomach can deal with. Right? But remember, you only have to eat matzah the first day. Rest of the days, you don't have to eat matzah. Cannot eat chametz, but you don't have to eat matzah, right? Okay, folks, we'll see you after Pesach. I'll send an email when we return to classes. Meanwhile, I'm going to try to get my act together and put all of this online. Okay, so if you guys want to review it and do it a little slower than what we have to do, because we're committed to 1 hour, you will be able to. All right? You guys take care. And
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Very much. And
Thank
have-
you, Rabbi.
bye,
Thank
bye,
you.
Charlie. Bye. Sonia, take care.